one critical point I think that both of them, the foreign ministers, as they are, raised today was that they need to be able to give Ukraine what it needs to win this war, to succeed in whatever shape the end of the war looks like. And they weren't talking in a defeatist manner. They weren't talking about negotiating, handing over territory. They were talking about Ukraine coming through this in a strong position in which it was able to hold its own.
Now, another big story today. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy, the American Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, we see they're now heading to Ukraine for a joint visit. This is at a key time. Ukraine's launched a drone attack while suspected Russian drones have been spotted over a number of European nations like Sweden, neighbours in NATO to Russia. It'll be the first joint UK-US trip for over a decade. What does it mean for that alliance? What does it mean for Ukraine? And the big question of the supply of missiles, longer-range missiles, to help Ukraine's war effort. Now, here the two of them are speaking at a conference in London.
We are the closest of allies, so I'm delighted that we will travel together, demonstrating our commitment to Ukraine.
This joint trip reflects strong transatlantic support, aligned also with our NATO allies, with our Indo-Pacific partners, with the more than 50 countries that continue to strongly and resolutely support Ukraine. Together, we're working to make sure that Ukraine can defend its territory against the ongoing aggression, that it will be able to stand strongly on its own 2 feet, militarily, economically, democratically.
That's James and David Lammy and Anthony Blinken. Now, Catherine Philp joins us, the World Affairs Editor at the Times. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, John.
Hi. I wonder what you read into this. The two of them are heading off to Ukraine together, talking the language of a reinvigorated accord between the US and the United Kingdom. On long-range missiles, for example, do you see any kind of sign there? We're going to see Britain and America moving together to allow Ukraine to sanction and approve the use of those longer-range missiles against Russia in Russian territory.
Well, it's very clear that the UK would like that to happen, and they want to see the Americans come on board with that. They essentially need the Americans' permission to allow Ukraine to do that, because some of the missiles that we've provided to Ukraine are ones that were developed in concert with the Americans. So they're essentially their permission is needed to go ahead with that. Now, what they said at that press conference was that they would have those conversations with President Zelensky in Kyiv on this joint trip they're doing, and that the eventual decision, I think we need to look to Keir Starmer's visit as Prime Minister to the White House on Friday. I think that's when any announcement might happen.
Right.
But feeding into that will be whatever discussions they have in Kyiv with the Ukrainians.
So I guess all we can do at this point then is speculate. If we are maybe heading down the road towards an agreement for those missiles to be used into Russian territory, might that involve then limitations on how that happens? So we've seen more and more of drone attacks on Moscow. Doesn't mean we're going to be seeing missiles, US-British missiles, used in anything like the same way.
I don't think it does. I think that what the Ukrainians are trying to do right now is to prove their case that they've put to the British and the Americans that that Putin's red lines are phony. Essentially, that by striking within Russia, they will not trigger a Third World War situation, a nuclear retaliation of the kind that Putin threatened early in the conflict. So I think that that is what's going on as they ramp up to this meeting, which is an important one for the Ukrainians. They are facing, obviously, a very difficult situation in the east of Ukraine at the moment, and also these relentless Russian attacks on their energy infrastructure as they go into another winter, in which obviously that could be very critical.
So you'll be watching that joint mission of the two foreign ministers into Ukraine a bit later on, and of course the visit of Keir Starmer to the White House to talk to Joe Biden at the end of this week. And I guess the question of how would Russia respond is again going to be very high up the agenda in that conversation. And I mentioned that because the foreign pages of the Times today leads on some interesting reporting about those Russian strikes, as it were, into NATO territory. Countries like Estonia, Poland, and Sweden affected too by Russian drones. What does that mean, and will that be escalating, given what we're talking about now?
I mean, that will be part of the discussion because, again, this is what what NATO's fears have been about this conflict. That if it escalates and if it is seen to be a NATO on Russia conflict, that you will see these kind of strikes. But there's a very big difference in that sort of interference type strikes and nuclear strikes of the kind that Putin was talking about when this conflict broke out. So I think that that there's a lot of discussion to be had about this, and there's a lot of risk assessment to be made. But one critical point I think that both of them, the foreign ministers, as they are raised today, was that they need to be able to give Ukraine what it needs to win this war, to succeed in whatever shape the end of the war looks like. And they weren't talking in a defeatist manner. They weren't talking about negotiating, handing over territory. They were talking about Ukraine coming through this in a strong position in which it was able to hold its own.
All right, Catherine, thank you for joining us. Looking forward to the next conversation about the next stage of all of this, that visit to Ukraine and the Prime Minister's visit to Washington and what that might all yield. Catherine Phil, World Affairs Editor at The Times there. And now we're joined by Stig Abel, who can tell us about his show tomorrow. He's alongside Rosie Wright from 6 on Times Radio, our breakfast programme. Hi, Stig.